All right, continuing with an overview of State of Ohio regulations. Let's talk a little bit about the ODOT Real Estate Manual. It implements the regulations for the waiver of appraisal, and it establishes the procedural process for ODOT to do waiver valuations. FHWA has approved this process, and non-compliance to ODOT procedures for waiver valuations becomes a violation of 23 CFR Part 710, and that can affect Title 23 funding for highway projects. Next, we'll review where to find the procedures for the value analysis report. All right, we go to the 4000 section of the Appraisal Operating Manual. And that section of the manual has 4000.05, which is USPAP in the VA, 0.07 paragraph E, which is appraisal scoping checklist, section D, paragraph C5B, which is pre-approval of staff to do the VA, D, which is pre-qualification requirements for consultants, and 15B1A are VA and data sheets. In the 4100 section of our appraisal manual is managing the FMVE delivery process, and VAs are discussed here. We discuss appraisal scoping and checklists that are required. Review of the VA isn't required. RE22s are not required for the VA. And we talk about how FMVE is established with the VA. Next is the 4200 section, which is valuation formats. And under this section, we talk about uncomplicated valuation problems for the VA, and then the procedure for the value analysis report. Also, we have the 4300 section, which is review of eminent domain appraisals, and the VA is discussed in there too. The value analysis reports don't require a review, and if we do review it, we outline the process for an optional review of the VA. 4400 is guide to compensability, and there's no discussion of the VA there, and 4500 is non-eminent domain valuations, and obviously the VA cannot be used for those type of valuations. So how do we find these procedures? Go to the internet and search for Ohio Department of Transportation, and up pops the website for Ohio Department of Transportation. Click on it, and up pops the page for ODOT's webpage. We would look for divisions, which is right directly above, and we would select engineering. And then division of engineering would come up, and we would then select real estate, and then we would scroll down to manuals. So there's the real estate webpage, and we would scroll down to manuals, and this would be our selection of manuals. We would then select which appraisal manual we wanted. There's 4000, 4100, 43, 44, and 4500. And we've just squared that in. Or below is the link. You could just click on it, and that would take you right to real estate. What you're looking at now are the procedures for the value analysis. We can only use the approved VA form, and again, there's the link to get to that form. Must be on ODOT's list as pre-qualified to prepare the value analysis report, and the process to estimate compensation for the VA is ODOT and the preparer of the VA are going to fill out the pre-assignment check sheet. Both sign that form. Their signatures signify that everyone agrees the valuation problem is uncomplicated and the anticipated compensation is less than $10,000. Then the person preparing the VA is going to determine the whole property and what its highest and best use is. The whole is considered as a vacant site. The only improvements to be considered are in the take area. Improvements outside the take area are ignored. They're going to value the whole property using the sales comparison approach and going to determine the unit value for the whole property, again, as a vacant site. Going to apply that unit value to the area taken to determine compensation for the land taken. And we're going to determine compensation for any site improvements taken and any temporary easements taken. Those are added to compensation for the land taken. We're going to then, that person is then going to fill out the VA form and they're going to sign the form when it's completed. Additionally, they're going to need to make sure that attachments are completed and submitted with the VA, and currently attachments include a sales location map for the comps, sketches, photographs, and the pre-assignment check sheet. Other items for the value analysis report, we only use the VA when there's a partial taking or a total taking, because a total taking is considered complex. It must be clear there's no damages to the residue. If it's not apparent, it then becomes a complex valuation problem. And the preparer of the VA must physically inspect the property. On a VA, compensation consists of value of the land taken, value of the part taken site improvements, value of the temporary construction easement, and the total of those equals compensation to the property owner. Next, we'll talk about the interrelationship between highway plans, the instruments used for the taking, and using this information to determine if the waiver of appraisal should be used. Under regulation, ODOT may waive the appraisal if 1, the valuation problem is uncomplicated, and 2, if that compensation is less than $10,000. An uncomplicated valuation problem means that it is apparent that after the taking occurs, the residue property does not suffer severance damages. The residue functions as it did before the taking. The highest and best use remains unchanged. The conclusion is that the taking was nominal. The biggest problem for those preparing the value analysis report is not understanding that the valuation problem is complicated, that there are damages to the residue, and ignoring those and proceeding to complete the value analysis. And the result is compensation that is not fair to the owner. The highway plans and the instruments are used to assist in determining if the valuation problem is uncomplicated. All right, so what you're looking at right now is a detail sheet from a right-of-way plan. Plans need to include the right-of-way component, the cross-sections, the plan and profile, and summary sheet. The plans detail the area taken, improvements in the take, sizes, drives, the residue property, utilities, elevation changes, ownership, property rights to be taken, and much more pertinent information that needs to be considered. The plans help us understand what the whole property is, what the take is, and what the residue is. The plans help us understand how the severance of the area taken from the whole affects the residue property. So how do you become competent at reading plans? Well, ODOT offers several plan reading courses throughout the year. Take them. You can mentor under someone who's knowledgeable of ODOT's plans. And you can practice, drill, and rehearse with the plans. And don't be afraid to ask questions from those who are more knowledgeable about plans. Go to the property and you can compare the plans to what physically exists. Next, you'll need to be competent understanding of ODOT's instruments. The instrument provides detail of the property rights to be taken. And being knowledgeable of the rights taken, you will better understand the rights remaining, and that affects the residue property. The person preparing the VA should also have a copy of the title report, which describes the ownership of the property and other issues that may affect the value of the property, such as easements, encumbrances, and property rights held by other parties. These instruments are created by the Ohio Attorney General's Office as mandated by Section 5501.34 of the Ohio Revised Code. Remember, that is the section of the code that governs the Ohio Department of Transportation. These instruments cannot be modified by anyone other than an attorney with the Attorney General's Office. So let's look at an example of how to find out about property rights. What we're looking at now is from the summary page of the right-of-way plans. It's a blow-up, and we've just outlined in red parcel 2WD, which is owned by Joseph and Diana Kemperer. These summary sheets describe the parcel number and the type of taking. In this case, it's a WD. What does WD mean? To answer that, we need to look at the right-of-way plan manual and ODOT's instrument. So we go to ODOT's Office of Real Estate's webpage, we go to manuals, and we select right-of-way plan manual. And when we do that, we open up the plan manual and we go to section 3202, fee simple. And remember, we're looking for WD, and WD is right there. The taking is fee simple, but leaving the owner with the right of access. Be careful on this one because some LPAs use this WD modifier, but they take absolute fee, leaving no access right to the owner. So if you're an appraiser doing valuations for LPAs, find out from the LPAs if they're using ODOT standards or they're using their own standards. Next, let's look at the ODOT instrument. There's the ODOT instrument for a WD, which is warranty deed. It's created by the Ohio Attorney General's office, can only be modified by an attorney with the Attorney General's office. So if we wanted to find that, we would have gone to the ODOT Office of Real Estate webpage. We would go to Forms, and we would have selected RE202, which would be the standard warranty deed. In this warranty deed, it states that the grantor grants to the grantee all right, title, and interest in fee simple. This makes it sound like ODOT is taking all rights and is not reserving access. If this were true, the residue would be potentially landlocked and the valuation problem just became complex. But wait, there's one more part of the instrument, and it's called the Exhibit A. So we would go to the ODOT webpage, we would select RX forms, and we would select RX 250, which is for the WD instrument. And there's the attachment to the WD instrument. And it says, this explains that ODOT is taking all right, title, and interest in fee simple without limitation of access. The grantor, which is the seller, reserves all existing rights of ingress and egress. And then below that is where the legal description created by the surveyor goes. So this is the section of the instrument that explains that we are not taking the access rights. After we acquire the fee simple, the owner still retains the access rights they had before. So after the taking, owner of the property has all the access rights as before the taking. So in review, the person preparing the value analysis report must be aware and competent in those things necessary for its completion, must understand the federal and state regulations that govern the waiver of appraisal process. They must understand ODOT procedures that implement these regulations that are the basis for the value analysis report. That person must have a competent understanding of highway plans, including the right-of-way component, cross-section plan and profile, and summary sheets. They must be able to interpret the plans to determine the whole property and the effect of the taking on the residue property. They must understand the property rights taken and the rights that remain with the residue property, and they must understand ODOT's instruments to do that. They must have the ability to determine what the whole is, the ability to determine the highest and best use of the whole property, the ability to understand what the taking is legally and physically, and the ability to determine the impact of the taking on the residue property. It is now time for a knowledge check.